This
very much.
conference will now be recorded.
Good morning. Thank everyone for joining us for the Caregiver Help web series. We're really excited about this topic today, Ducks in a Row, and I know our facilitator, Elaine Sanchez, has done a lot of preparation, making sure that we all have everything that we need, or at least our roadmap to starting to get everything in order. So I won't take up too much time. I'll just let everyone know the format. We will do a hour presentation. If you have questions along the presentation, feel free to enter them into the chat box. We will see those on this end and make sure that they're answered. Also, after the full presentation, we will stop the recording and then have a question and answer session. So, Elaine, I'll turn it over to you.
Okay, thank you, Erica. I appreciate it so much. And I admire all of those who have joined this webinar because these are not easy topics and they're very easy to avoid. The first three stages of life are fun. We have birth, growth, and reproduction. And nobody has trouble talking about this or planning for it. But then the last two stages, decline and death, are topics that most people want to avoid. When it comes to incapacity and death, a lot of people tend to stick their heads in the sand. Now, I am not an attorney, but I did settle my parents. I was the trustee for their estate. And I was the personal representative for my Aunt Jean. And I'm going to tell you that sticking your head in the sand is not a good plan. So you might be asking, so why does a person need to plan for end of life? And here are the major benefits. The first one is you get to control your medical care. You decide if you want life support and tube feeding. And it doesn't matter what you tell your family. If you don't have this in writing in an advance directive, the doctors are going to be obligated to keep you alive. You also get to decide who gets your money. You get to control who gets your family heirlooms. And you get the power to decide what happens to all of your stuff. Now, what happens if you don't prepare? Maybe your family would look like this. They would be peaceful, cooperative, and agreeable. Or they might look a little more like this. So do you remember the story of Terri Schiavo? I think this is one of the most tragic stories that has happened in my memory. She was 26 years old and she had a cardiac arrest, and they were able to revive her. And for 2 years, they did very aggressive physical occupational therapy trying to bring her back. And finally, the doctors declared that she was in a persistent vegetative state. And her husband said she would not want to live like this, and he wanted to discontinue the life support. Her parents believed with all of their hearts that she was still in there, and if they just were patient enough and worked hard enough, that eventually she would come back to them. So they would not agree to discontinue life support. And at age 26, who thought that Terri was going to need an advance directive, right? So after 14 legal appeals, multiple state and federal court cases, discontinuing Terri's life support became a political football. And there were representatives and senators, and even President George Bush got involved. It took 15 years before her husband got the legal authority to discontinue her life support. And Terri died at age 41, 19 days after they removed her feeding tube. And the process was incredibly painful for everyone. Her death broke a lot of hearts and destroyed so many relationships. And I feel so sad and sorry for everyone who was involved in this, because her parents loved her, her husband loved her, and they all wanted to do what they thought was best for her, but they simply could not agree. So I want to ask you to take a little test. I don't know how many people are on this call today, but if I were to say at the end of the call that I have some things that I'm not going to be able to take with me, like I have a house and it has a lot of furniture, and we have a car, and we have some money in the bank, and I have some jewelry. And what if I said, I'm not going to be able to keep this at the end of this event? Do you think that all of you on this group could get on a phone call and decide how to divide it? Probably. I'm thinking probably, because none of you have any emotional attachment to any of my stuff. None of you think that you are entitled to any of it, and it would just be a gift. None of you have any memories or any feelings about anything that I have ever owned. Okay, but what if this were your stuff? What if it was your money and your vehicles and your home? How do you think your family would react? Would they look like this? Or do you think they would look like this? If peace in the family matters to you, I just can't stress this strongly enough. You will want to get your ducks in a row. And this is where we start. Assess your condition and your care receiver's situation realistically. Accept that decline and death are an inevitable part of the life cycle. And then this is where you really need to get aggressive. Determine what needs to be done and who can help you. So if your life feels like this, if you feel like you are constantly managing one crisis after another, I'm thinking it might be a good time to get some help. So talking about where do you start? I think the most important thing is to assess the safety of yourself and of the loved ones that you are caring for. And there are 6 major areas that we all need to be aware of. And there is the physical safety, mental, emotional, social, financial, and legal. And I'm just going to go through these quickly. Are they safe to drive? Are they safe in their home? Can they manage their medications? And when it comes to mental abilities, can they manage their money? Can they follow directions? Can you tell them to do 3 things, and can they remember it, and can they do it? For instance, if you said, could you put the water, the silverware, and the napkins on the table, can they do that without any hiccups? Are they vulnerable to scams? Could they be coerced or tricked into doing something that would not be in their best interest? And now their emotional condition. Do they seem reasonably optimistic and happy? Or do they appear to be depressed or grieving? Do they get angry often? And then take a look at their social situation. Are they attending regularly scheduled social events? Do they enjoy activities with others? Are they staying connected to friends? These are important because isolation and loneliness lead to depression, and depression is very common among people who are older and people who are suffering with long-term progressive diseases such as Parkinson's. And then you need to assess the financial situation. Do they have enough money to meet current needs? Are they paying their bills on time? Can they afford to hire in-home help? Can they pay for assisted living or skilled nursing care if that's the next step? So if you go through and think about these things and think, yes, there are some risk areas here, what do you do next? Where do you look for help? And my first suggestion is to obviously contact Erica with the Parkinson's Resource Center, but beyond that, contact your local area agency on aging. And the website is right here, www.n4a.org. You can make an appointment or even talk to them on the phone and get free advice, referrals, and resources in your area. So, for instance, if you're living in Louisville and your mom is in Kansas, you can go to this website, you can type it in, and you can get connections for resources in her particular zip code. Senior centers are a great resource for low-cost meals, for socialization and exercise, for entertainment. And if you are feeling like you're spending too much time at home and you just don't have enough engagement or entertainment or reasons to laugh or people to talk to, find your local senior center. Adult daycare is a great option to provide respite for the caregiver. You can take them, you can drop them off, they will have people to visit with, they can have conversations, they can engage in activities, and it's a great break for both of you. Dementia daycare is really important, I think, for both the person with the dementia and for the caregiver. We have one where I live in Salem, Oregon, and it's called Among Friends. And they've started doing art shows. They create some beautiful art. And it's fun activities for the care receiver. When they show up, they aren't in trouble. They haven't done anything wrong or bad. And as a caregiver, you get a break. You get some time to yourself to run errands, to buy groceries, to go take a nap, or to do whatever you need to do. But having some time apart and having some socialization is really, really important. Now, Premier Caregiver Services is one of our sponsors, and I think it's really helpful if you feel like you need to get out, and if your care receiver cannot necessarily get out, contact an organization like Premier Caregiver Services so they can bring someone into your home. These are non-medical care providers who can provide companionship, they can do light housework, and they can just give you a little bit of relief. If it is a medical condition that you need help with, you may already know how difficult it is to get somebody loaded up into a car and to a doctor's appointment. So home health care can provide regularly scheduled appointments for someone to come into the home and help you there. And now this is a big quagmire for a lot of people, is figuring out Medicare and Medicaid. If this is a puzzle for you, there is a resource, and they are throughout the country. It's called SHIP, Senior Health Insurance Assistant Program. And they have paid employees and they have trained volunteers who will help you wade through the different programs that are available and what you need to do for Medicare, Medicaid, and the different kinds supplemental plans that are available and what would work best for you in your situation. So this is a free service, and they aren't going to be trying to sell you anything. They're just going to help you wade through this tangle of information. Okay, and now this is the really important thing that we're getting to. Do you have a will or a trust? And there are two big differences in a trust and a will. And first, I'm going to tell you about a trust. A trust names a trustee. Upon your death, the trustee pays the debts, distributes the assets to the beneficiaries. You can avoid, unless you are incredibly wealthy, you can avoid estate taxes. You can minimize legal fees. It can be settled in weeks, and it's quick and it's easy. It takes a little more time to set up. It costs a little bit more to create a trust than a will, but it can make life so much easier for the people you leave behind. Now, a will appoints a personal representative. It names the beneficiaries. It requires the personal representative to inventory all assets. So you have to make a list of everything that the person owns upon his or her death. This must be submitted to the courts. It must go through probate. It is a lengthy and expensive process, and beneficiaries pay taxes on inheritance. Now, it's still better than not having a will, but it does not make inheriting money or property easy for the people who receive it. Okay, so you need a will or a trust, and then you need to have a durable power of attorney. A durable power of attorney manages your financial affairs if you cannot. And this person has the authority to spend your money like it is his or hers. So they will pay the rent, they'll pay for your accommodations in a long-term care facility, they can buy and sell real estate, they can spend the money to buy gifts. They spend it like it's theirs, okay? But it is yours. So you decide the scope. You decide how much power they have. You determine when it starts, when it ends, and what it includes. Now, I can't state this last thing. Maybe the person is trustworthy. You do not want to give this person the authority to spend your money if they have any kind of drug or alcohol addiction, if they haven't managed their own money well, if they're going through a divorce. I mean, there are so many reasons that you need to be very careful. If you do not have a family member that you think is capable of doing this for you and doing it well, then you can hire a professional to do this. You can hire a CPA, you can hire a trust company. There are lots of people who could do this for you that know how to do it and can do it well. And you need to have an advance directive, because this is what Terri Schiavo did not have. And so this is when it can get very, very complicated. In an advance directive, you determine whether, what condition you would want to have life support and tube feeding, and at what point you might want it to end. For instance, if you wanted to be on life support long enough for your family to come and say goodbye, you can put that into the advance directive. If you decide that if you reach a point where you can no longer feed yourself and you're in a vegetative state, you can state in your advance directive that you do not wish to be fed. I have put that in my advance directive, and it gives me a great deal of comfort to know that I will never be in a vegetative state in a bed for years on end. So who can help you do these things? If you or the person that you love has limited assets and they could not pay for long-term care, contact an elder law attorney. They can create a wealth spouse trust, and they can help the person who needs to be on Medicaid. Um, they can help you qualify for Medicaid. But this is not something simple. There are a lot of rules and regulations, and there's a 5-year look back. So if you're thinking that, well, we'll just give the money and all of our assets to our kids, you better not need Medicaid for 5 years, because you wouldn't qualify for it. So get legal help for this to understand what the rules and the regulations are, and get it set up properly. An estate planning attorney can help you set up a good trust, and you can create a legacy that you leave to your family. There are forms online that you can download and do yourself, and I just think that is such a risky thing to do, and I would just really encourage you to get the professional help who can help you set this up correctly, so that your family can know what you want, and they can, if they don't like it, then they can be mad at you instead of each other, and it's not going to matter to you because you're going to be gone, right? So what happens if you don't prepare? What happens if you don't have a durable power of attorney or a guardian? The court may have to appoint a conservator or a guardian or both for you. I had a dear friend whose husband developed kind of a sudden onset of Lewy body dementia. And she called me and said, "What should I do?" And I said, get your legal affairs in order right now. And they had not done it, unbelievably. And she was talking to someone at a long-term care facility, and they said, "Well, you need to get him to sign and assign you as his healthcare representative, because if you don't, you might have to go through the court to get approved as his conservator to pay his bills and make his financial decisions. And then you would also have to get approved as his guardian to manage his healthcare decisions." And that's a spouse. That doesn't always happen, but it could, and you need to be aware of it. This is cumbersome, it's invasive, and it's expensive, because you have to account for every penny you spend, and you have to account for all of the decisions that you make. So I think we can all agree that that is not a good plan. So now I'm going to share with you my own story, and I debated about this, but I think you can tell people statistics and they don't remember it, but there's something about hearing a story and putting yourself in those shoes that can help motivate you to do the right thing. And so I've decided to share this in hopes that it will motivate you to get your ducks in a row if you haven't already. So this is my Aunt Jean. This picture was taken the summer that she turned 90. And the summer that she was 80, we encouraged her to move to Oregon, where we live. Aunt Jean has no children. Her husband had died a year earlier. A lot of her friends were getting older. They were sick. They were dying. They were moving away. And she was in Florida with a very small support group. So we said, why don't you move to Oregon, and you'll be close to us and close to our family. And so for 10 years, she was a major part of our family life. We were with her at least a couple times a week. I talked to her on the phone almost every day. We took her on trips. We took her to church, and we enjoyed having her as a part of our life. And on September 28th, 2016, we celebrated Jean's birthday. And she said it was the best birthday she had ever had. less than a month later, she had her annual checkup. She saw the doctor. The doctor said, Jean, you're in great shape. I will see you next year. 2 days later, I went to pick her up at the community where she lived because I had a nephew in town and we were planning a family dinner. So I went to get her. And when I walked in, I looked at her and I was stunned. She looked horrible. And I asked her how she was feeling, and she said, I don't think I'm feeling very well. She said, I think I'm not going to go tonight. And I said, okay, you know what? It was raining, it was cold, and I was trying to figure out how to get her into the restaurant without her getting wet, and I just didn't think she looked good. And when she said she didn't want to go, I felt relieved. So the next morning, when we were all having breakfast and getting ready to go see her, I got a phone call from the administrator, and he said, Jean's not doing well this morning. We had to help her get down to the dining room. She couldn't walk, and she's been dropping her food, and she seems very disoriented. So I said, I'll be right there. So I drove right over, and I took her to the hospital very much against her wishes. She was not happy with me that I took her to the hospital. In the emergency room, she was diagnosed with pneumonia. Jean had been strong. She was stubborn and independent, and I did not at that point think that this would be a life-ending event. And I just assumed that they would give her antibiotics and that she would be just fine. So this was on October 30th, 3 days later, that I went in to see her in the morning. And the nurse asked me if I had a copy of her advance directive. And I knew her attorney. He was a personal friend of mine. I drove her to the appointment and I waited while she talked to him. Now, Aunt Jean worked for the government. So to say that she was secretive would be a gross understatement. So I knew that she had appointed me as her personal representative, and I had asked her not to because settling my parents' estate was not a fun experience for me. And about 2 years after she moved, I insisted that she sit down with me and give me instructions about what she wanted me to do, and I needed particular information, and she did not want to do it. But I really pushed the issue. So she gave me a baggie full of little index cards that had some account numbers, had her social security number, her Medicare information, all of this. So I knew I didn't have a copy of her advance directive. And when I spoke to the nurse, she made it very clear that Jean might not live and that this was going to be a very difficult situation if she did not have an advance directive. And I knew that she needed it. So at 7:30 Sunday morning, I called, actually 7 o'clock, I called Jean's attorney at home. Fortunately, he was a good friend. He went down to his office and he had to dig it out because it had been made a long time ago and it was in a box rather than on a computer. But at 11 a.m., he faxed Jean's advance directive to the hospital. At noon, the doctor came in and he said, Jean, you have two things going on. You have pneumonia and your heart is failing. And he said, if your heart fails, I need to know what you want me to do. And he said, if you tell me you want me to do everything, we will do chest compressions. I'll probably break some of your ribs. It will be very painful. And I don't think you will ever be in a condition to go back and live independently. And he said, I need for you to tell me what you want me to do. And she looked at him and she said, I want you to make me well. Which did not make it easy for me because in her advance directive, she said that I was her healthcare representative and I was to follow her instructions unless I was to do what I thought was best unless my opinion differed from her instructions. So at midnight, I got a phone call and the nurse said, Jean's heart is failing. And she said, do you want us to put in a pacemaker? And I asked, will she be able to live independently if this is a successful operation? And the nurse said, no, she will need to go into nursing care. And I then asked, if she were your mother, would you do it? And she said, no, I would not. And I said, I believe that there are some things that are worse than death. And I think for Jean, losing her independence and being confined to a bed in a nursing home would be a living hell. And I think that that is worse than death. And the nurse said, I agree. So at 3 o'clock, I got a call, and the nurse said that they had noticed on the bed monitor that Jean was trying to get out of bed. And so she went in and she said, Jean, can I help you? And Jean said, yes, get my bill ready. I need to leave. And shortly after that, she had a stroke, a massive stroke. And it was a nurse this time, actually. It was a doctor who called me the first time. I said it was a nurse, but it was a doctor. And she said, do you want to start comfort care? And I said, wait until I get there. I'll be there in 30 minutes. So when I got there, it was about 4 o'clock in the morning, and gradually through the day, my husband and my children and one of Jean's friends came, and we were all with her when she died at 6 o'clock on Monday night. And it was hard. We were sad. I loved Jean, but I believed with all of my heart that I made the right decision for her. She was still angry with me that I had brought her to the hospital, and she believed that they were just running all of these tests on her so they could run up her bill. And she just couldn't accept the fact that that she wasn't going to get well. So she put me in a difficult place. But having been through the end of life care with my parents, I believe 100% with all of my heart and soul that I made the right decision for her. And then it was time to sort through her things. So we went to her apartment, and I was shocked and overwhelmed. She had some decorative screens in her apartment. I thought they were decorative, but what they were doing is they were covering up stacks of grocery bags that had all sorts of bank statements, investment statements, advertisements, mail, letters, cards, junk mail, and they were stuffed and stacked behind these two huge decorative screens, and then all of her doors, and drawers. And I forgot to mention that on the day that she died, I was 1 week away from having back surgery. So through this entire thing, I was in really terrible pain. So I dug out my little baggie with all of her index cards that I had had in my safe, and we went to meet with Jean's attorney. And he said she did have me draw up a very skeletal will, and he said she was so secretive that she didn't tell me anything. I did find out going through some of this, some of these bags, that on her, on most of her financial state, on most of her accounts, investments, and bank accounts, it was noted TOD, which means transfer on death. More about that later. 1 week later, I had back surgery, and thank goodness for my husband, for our kids and our friends who came to help and clean up Jean's apartment, to bring food, and it was really tremendously horrible and helpful to have that kind of support. So as I started going through Jean's estate, and based on the information that I had in those index cards, I learned that Jean had had one account and my Uncle Frank had had another account. And on Jean's account, my brother 1 and brother 2 were listed as beneficiaries. And on Uncle Frank's account, brother 3 and me, little sis, were listed as the beneficiaries. And then Jean made all 4 siblings equal beneficiaries of Uncle Frank's account. So we were all sharing it 25%. And then when the financial crisis happened, Jean ended up closing Frank's account and she moved all of the money to her account. Now she thought what she was doing was making all 4 of us equal beneficiaries. But in fact, the paperwork did not get completed, and so brother 1 and brother 2 were listed as the beneficiaries for this quite large account. So as you can imagine, brother 3 and I were not very happy. So in her will, Jean said, I have designated some TOD accounts to go to my 3 nephews and my niece. And they are in more or less equal shares. So the TOD accounts trumped the will because the will was not specific. And brother 1 and brother 2 were not legally obligated to share. So about 2 months after Jean's death, and as I continued to sort through all of these bags, I found a letter from Jean's advisor with her account, and her handwritten instructions were to list all 4 kids as equal beneficiaries, and there was a note that said they would do it by October 20th. And one brother said, I believe that was Jean's intention, and he said, I'll share. And brother 1 said, I think she liked me best. I think she intended to do that. I'm keeping it. But you can imagine that created some family conflict. I had a lot of trouble sleeping. I was so upset. Some days I felt like this. Many days I felt like this. Eventually, brother 1 said, I'll share some of it. He didn't share it equally, but he did share some of it. So in the final distribution, this is kind of how it looked. So after many, many months and a lot of money on attorney's fees, it finally came to a peaceful close. I didn't need Jean's money. Brother 1 did. He needed the money more than I did. But what if the situation had been different? There are a lot of people who give up their jobs and their retirement and their insurance, and they go to live with parents to take care of them. Had I done that, had I given up my income, if I had counted on an inheritance from her to make up for the money that I could have been making during my working years, I would have been in a terrible shape. And if Jean knew what she had done unintentionally, I know that she would be furious with herself, and she would have been furious with my brother. So if you don't want to put your family through this, I really want to encourage you to get your ducks in a row, because words and wishes are worthless. No matter how many times you tell your kids that you don't want any extreme measures taken, that doesn't matter. And that was made very, very clear to me in the hospital with Aunt Jean. She said she wanted no extreme measures, but if I didn't have the authority to make medical decisions on her behalf, they would have done the heart, the pacemaker, and they would have put her on life support. They would have kept her alive. So if you want to be the captain of your own ship, I just really, really want you to meet with an attorney and prepare your end of life documents. And then there are some wonderful new programs now that you can use to record this, so that people never have to go through what I did in looking for it. There's a program called DocuBank, and when we did our trust, our attorney signed us up for this, and then we renew it every 5 years. It's like $75 or something. And this is a card that we put in our wallet behind our driver's license with our Medicare cards and our supplemental insurance policies and all of that. And with this, a hospital can contact DocuBank, and within minutes, they can have your advance directive along with your list of family and your personal your healthcare representatives and all of the prescriptions that you're taking. So I really, really, really encourage you to get these things done, and to have your family have a meeting with your family and let them know uh, where your things are. So, the first thing is to make a plan and um, get to an attorney and get this in writing. And then share with your children what your wishes are. Let them know what they can expect. And you don't have to give them specific amounts. You can make up a personal property distribution list. And this is an important thing, because my mother had china that she bought when my dad was in the service in World War II. And every time she got a paycheck, she would buy a piece of that china. Now, that china was precious to me. I had 3 sisters-in-law. They may have wanted it as well. But my mother made it very clear that that china was mine. So you don't have to tell everybody up front what you're going to be giving them, because you might change your mind. People get divorces, people die. You might change your mind about what you want to give to someone. But if you have a list, a personal property distribution list, you can update that, you can change it. The important thing is that your attorney has a copy of it, and you have it in with your with your legal documents. So update your plan, because as I said, lives change. People get divorced. They might have drug or alcohol issues, and you may want to appoint a trustee inside of your trust to make sure that that money is spent wisely. And then check your plan. So this is something that I would have never thought to ask Aunt Jean, to talk to her financial advisor, and see who did she have listed as her beneficiaries. I didn't think to ask her that. And when I talked to that advisor, he said, well, it's none of my business. I said, my financial advisor asks us every year if anything has changed, if these are the beneficiaries that we have now that we still want. And he said, well, it's none of my business. I don't care who people decide to give their money to. And I said, well, maybe you don't care, but I'm pretty sure that your clients care. And as a professional financial advisor, I would think it would be important to you to know that they are going to be getting it to who they want to receive it. So that was a disappointment, and it created a tremendous amount of stress that was not necessary in my particular situation. And then the other thing is to let people know where to find your plan. Do you have it in some obscure file cabinet? Do you have it in a safety deposit box? Do you have an attorney? Do you have it with an attorney? All of these things. So after Jean died, and after I got her estate settled, my husband and I decided that it was time to review our plan. We had done one about 10 years earlier, and we had one 5-year update, and so we decided it was time to do that again. And I realized how much things had changed from the time we first made up our trust, because so many things that I do now are on the internet, and we do our banking on the internet. We have bills that are automatically paid. We have money that is automatically deposited, and I realized that if my children did not have the code, first of all, to get into my computer, they would not ever be able to access any of these passwords. So, Erica, I have a form that I developed that helps identify all of these things, and I will be happy to send that to you without my information, of course, so that you can send that out to people. So that will kind of help them get organized. And then I probably have 150 different passwords for different accounts, and I subscribe to a little service. It's called Wallet, and you pay $10 for it for your laptop, and you pay $10 to use it on your mobile device like a telephone. So when you have Wallet, and you can just Google it, you can go to your app store or wherever you buy apps. You can download it. Then you only have to remember one password, and that would be the password for Wallet. And then once you get into Wallet, everything is alphabetized, and all of your usernames and passwords are there. And it will just make things so much more simple for people trying to figure out our affairs, if something would happen and I wouldn't be able to make those decisions. So understand that if something happens to you, and if you become incapacitated, your family's going to be really, really stressed. And if if they are going through something, you cannot be certain that they are going to be in a good spot themselves if something happens to you. Just like Aunt Jean, she was healthy. She was fine. I mean, she appeared to be until 5 days before she died. Um, so, and I was facing back surgery. So I was not in a good physical place to be taking care of her through her death, which I was proud and happy and honored to do. But boy, it got hard cleaning up the mess afterward. Um, and your family will be devastated when you die. So just know this. This is going to be a tremendously emotional, difficult time for your family members. But if you can get your ducks in a row now, you can avoid this. And you can leave your family a legacy of peace. And you can leave them with happy memories instead of stressful memories. And I was telling my husband yesterday, I said, you know, this has been a difficult process for me creating this webinar because I kind of went through this whole thing again. And the interesting thing to me is that it was easier for me to forgive my brother than it was for me to forgive Aunt Jean. And I have gotten there with both of them because if you've been on any of my other webinars, you know how I feel about carrying around a lot of anger toward other people. It's just, you know, it's like drinking poison and expecting the other person to die. I just had to get over it. But I don't want my children ever feeling like I was so stubborn or so secretive that I put them in a position where they had to help me being blindfolded through the whole process. And I can't imagine that any of you on this webinar today would want that for your family either. So it's not easy, but the very best time to plan for incapacity and death is while you have the ability to do it, while you have the mental capacity and the emotional bandwidth to deal with it, and before your family desperately needs it. So I hope that didn't sound too much like a sermon, but I hope you will think about these things and that you will get in touch with a good attorney and get your affairs organized before your family really, really needs it. And Erica, we're going to be finishing here just a few minutes early, so we have some additional time for questions or comments. So I'm going to turn it back to you at this point.
Okay, well, thank you very much. Let me end the recording. So give me 1 second, please.